My name is Elena Rosa Martinez. I'm 68 years old, born in 1956 in East Los Angeles, where the air carried the scent of fresh tortillas from corner bakeries, the sound of mariachi music drifting from quinceañera celebrations, and the weight of dreams deferred by circumstances beyond our control. I live in San Antonio now, in a modest adobe-style house with a courtyard where I grow cilantro, marigolds, and stubborn chili peppers that remind me of my grandmother's fierce spirit. The wooden gate creaking a familiar greeting after all these years. The house was built in the 1940s, with tile floors that stay cool even in the brutal Texas heat, thick walls that hold the whispers of previous families, and a kitchen where the comel still bears the scorch marks from decades of homemade tortillas. The walls are painted terracotta, the color of desert sunsets, and every room holds fragments of my journey. Photographs of my parents on their wedding day, Mama in her white dress with hand-sewn lace, Papa in his only suit, both of them young, and hopeful in a way that breaks my heart now that I understand what the world had waiting for them. My mama, Esperanza, was a seamstress in the garment district, her fingers permanently stained with dye, her voice a soft melody of Spanish lullabies. That wrapped around our cramped apartment like a protective blanket during the long nights when Papa worked double shifts at the steel plant. She hunched over industrial sewing machines in a factory with no air conditioning, the summers brutal as she guided fabric through machines that never stopped, creating clothes that would be sold in department stores where she could never afford to shop. Her hands moved with precision born of necessity, each stitch representing pennies that accumulated into dollars that kept us fed, clothed, and housed in a neighborhood where many families struggled to achieve even that basic stability. The factory was a concrete building with small windows and fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly, filled with women from across Latin America who had come north seeking opportunities that often proved more limited than the dreams that had drawn them here. They worked side by side, speaking Spanish in hushed tones during brief breaks, sharing stories of children left behind, husbands searching for work, extended families depending on the money they sent home each month. Mama was one of the lucky ones. She had brought her family with her. We were together, but the price of that fortune was measured in 12-hour days, in fingers that bled from needle pricks, in a back that curved more each year under the weight of constant bending over machines. The sound of her sewing machine was the lullaby of my childhood, a rhythm that meant security, even as it represented sacrifice, meant Mama was working to build something better for us even as the work itself wore her down thread by thread. She would come home exhausted, her feet swollen from standing on concrete floors, her eyes strained from focusing on tiny stitches under harsh lights. But she always had energy for us children, always listened to our problems with the patience of someone who understood that our education, our dreams, our chances for something better were the real products of her labor. My papa, Roberto, worked at the Bethlehem steel plant, his hands scarred from hot metal, his eyes holding the quiet determination of a man who had crossed a desert to give his children opportunities he'd never had. He left before sunrise each morning, his lunch pail packed with beans and rice that Mama had prepared the night before, his work boots laced tight, his face set with the grim resolve of someone who understood that his body was the only capital he possessed, that his willingness to endure heat and danger and exhaustion was what stood between his family and poverty. The steel plant was a monument to industrial America, its smokestacks visible from our apartment windows, its furnaces glowing orange against the night sky like man-made volcanoes. Papa worked in the foundry, pouring molten metal into molds, the temperature so extreme that men regularly collapsed from heat exhaustion, the work so dangerous that accidents were common, expected, factored into the cost of doing business. He came home each evening covered in soot and sweat, his clothes stiff with industrial residue, his face marked by the goggles that protected his eyes from sparks and flying metal. But despite the exhaustion, despite the physical toll, Papa always had time for us, always asked about school, always emphasized that education was the path away from the kind of backbreaking labor that was consuming him day by day. His English was heavily accented but improving, and he made us practice with him each evening, all of us learning together, all of us working toward a future that seemed both possible and impossibly distant. I had 4 siblings, 3 sisters, Maria, Carmen, and little Luz, and 1 brother, Diego, who filled our 2-bedroom apartment with noise, laughter, arguments, and the kind of fierce loyalty that develops when a family faces the world together. Maria was the eldest, born in 1954, with Mama's gentle nature and Papa's stubborn streak, always the one trying to keep peace when the rest of us fought over space, toys, or attention. She was like a second mother to the younger ones, helping, with homework, braiding hair, settling disputes with the wisdom of someone forced to grow up too quickly. Carmen was born in 1955, just a year older than me, with a quick wit and quicker temper, always ready to defend any of us against outside threats, always the first to speak up when she perceived injustice. She had inherited Papa's fire and Mama's protective instincts, a combination that made her formidable even as a child, respected by neighborhood kids who learned not to underestimate her despite her small stature. Diego came in 1958, our only brother, carrying the weight of being Papa's son in a culture that placed specific expectations on boys, always trying to prove himself worthy of the hopes and dreams that rested on his shoulders. He was gentle like Mama but strong like Papa, with hands that could fix anything broken, and a mind that absorbed information like a sponge, already showing signs of the engineer he would eventually become. Little Luz was our baby, born in 1960, with enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom and a voice that could make even the hardest hearts melt. She was everyone's favorite, spoiled by all of us, protected and cherished as if she were made of spun glass, her laughter the soundtrack that made our cramped quarters feel like a palace. Growing up Mexican-American in East LA was like living in 2 worlds simultaneously, never fully belonging to either, always translating not just language but culture, expectations, and dreams. Our neighborhood was alive with the sounds of Spanish mixed with English, children playing in streets where vendors sold elotes and raspados, the smell of cooking oil and cumin drifting from apartment windows where women recreated the foods of their homeland with ingredients found in American supermarkets. The streets were lined with small businesses, carnicerias, panaderias, botanicas, that served our community's needs while also serving as gathering places where news was shared, gossip exchanged, and the connections that held our community together were strengthened. These businesses were more than commercial enterprises. They were cultural anchors, places where the Spanish language could be spoken without apology, where Mexican traditions could be maintained and passed down, where people could find familiar foods and products that connected them to homes they had left behind. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building that housed 3 families, the walls thin enough that we knew our neighbors' routines, arguments, and celebrations as intimately as our own. The stairs creaked under foot traffic, the plumbing was temperamental, and the heating was inadequate during the brief LA winters, but it was ours, and Mama made it feel spacious with careful arrangements, hanging sheets to create privacy, using furniture to divide spaces, making every corner serve multiple purposes. The living room doubled as Mama's sewing space during the day, and our study hall at night, the kitchen table serving as homework desk, dining table, and Papa's workspace, where he counted his weekly pay and planned the family budget down to the last penny. The kitchen was barely large enough for our family of 7, but it was the heart of our home, where we gathered for meals that Mama stretched to feed everyone, where Spanish was spoken freely, where stories of Mexico were told and retold, keeping alive connections to a place some of us had never seen, but all of us carried in our hearts. But outside our neighborhood, the world was different, colder, quicker to judge, faster to assume that our brown skin and accented English meant we were less than, worth less than, deserving of less than. The city beyond East LA was divided by invisible lines that everyone understood but no one discussed openly. Boundaries that determined where we were welcome, where we could work, where we could live, where our children could attend school. Even within our own community, There were hierarchies, differences between families who had been in California for generations and those who had arrived more recently, between those who spoke perfect English and those who struggled with the language, between those who could pass for white in certain circumstances and those whose indigenous features marked them immediately as outsiders in Anglo spaces. This is my story, unvarnished and honest, about the times my heritage became a weapon used against me, about the moments when my accent, my name, my appearance became reasons for exclusion, about the scars those experiences left and the strength they helped me discover. These are the memories that shaped my understanding of what it means to be Mexican American in a country that wants your labor but questions your belonging, that celebrates your culture in restaurants and festivals while discriminating against your people in schools and workplaces. I was 12 when I first encountered discrimination that cut deep enough to leave permanent marks, like a burn that never quite heals. It was the fall of 1968, the air crisp with the promise of winter, the leaves on the few trees in our neighborhood, turning gold and brown, falling to sidewalks where children kicked them into piles that scattered in the wind. The year had been turbulent. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy had shaken our community. The war in Vietnam was claiming young men from our neighborhood, and the Chicano movement was beginning to stir, demanding rights and recognition that had been denied for generations. I was in 7th grade at Roosevelt Middle School, a sprawling concrete building with chain-link fences and windows covered with metal grating, more prison than school, overcrowded, with children from families like mine who saw education as the ladder out of poverty. The hallways smelled of industrial disinfectant and cafeteria food, the floors worn smooth by generations of students, the walls painted institutional green that seemed designed to suppress rather than inspire. My English had improved dramatically since starting school, though I still translated in my head sometimes, still dreamed in Spanish, still reverted to my native language when angry or excited. I was proud of my progress, proud of report cards that showed A's and B's, proud of teachers who had begun to notice my potential, to encourage me to think about high school, about college, about futures that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Mrs. Thompson was my English teacher, a middle-aged white woman with graying hair and kind eyes who had spent 20 years teaching in East LA, who understood the challenges her students faced and worked tirelessly to help them overcome those obstacles. Her classroom was different from the others. Bulletin boards covered with student work, shelves lined with books she had purchased with her own money, a general atmosphere of possibility and encouragement that made students want to succeed. She had been working with me on pronunciation, staying after school to help me master sounds that didn't exist in Spanish, encouraging me to read aloud, to participate in class discussions, to believe that my voice mattered, that my thoughts were worth sharing. Under her guidance, I had begun to think of myself as a good student, as someone with academic potential, as a person who might actually achieve the dreams my parents had sacrificed so much to make possible. The incident happened during a parent-teacher conference, a meeting I had been excited about because I knew Mrs. Thompson would have good things to say about my progress, my potential, my dedication to learning. Mama had taken time off work, losing wages she could ill afford to lose, to attend this meeting that we both saw as confirmation that the American dream was within reach, that education would indeed provide the opportunities we had hoped for. We arrived early, both of us dressed in our best clothes. Mama in a dress she had sewn herself, me in a skirt and blouse that Maria had outgrown and Mama had altered to fit me. We sat in the hallway outside Mrs. Thompson's classroom, waiting for our appointment, both of us nervous but hopeful, both of us believing that this meeting would be a celebration of achievement and progress. Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor, walked by and stopped when she saw us. She was a thin woman with sharp features and an expression of perpetual disapproval, known throughout the school for her belief that most of the students were destined for failure, that academic excellence was beyond the reach of children from our neighborhood. She looked at me, then at Mama, her eyes taking in our carefully chosen outfits, our obvious nervousness, our hopeful expressions. "Are you here for Elena Martinez?" she asked, her voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify, but that made my stomach tighten with unease. "Sí, yes," Mama replied, her English still heavily accented despite years of practice, her voice soft with the respect she had been taught to show to authority figures, especially those involved in her children's education. Mrs. Patterson smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the type of expression that people wear when they think they know something you don't, when they believe they possess information that will shatter your illusions and bring you back to what they consider your proper place in the world. "You know," she said, her voice casual, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather, "Elena is doing well enough for a Mexican girl, but you shouldn't get your hopes up too high. These children hit a wall academically around high school. It's just how it is." The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable carefully chosen to wound, to diminish, to place limits on possibilities that had seemed unlimited just moments before. For a Mexican girl, the phrase echoed in the institutional hallway, bounced off lockers and bulletin boards, seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a fire that was consuming my dreams in real time. Mama's face went blank, the expression she wore when she didn't understand English well enough to be sure she had heard correctly, when she needed time to process words that carried implications beyond their literal meaning. I saw her struggle to translate not just the language but the intent, to understand whether this woman had just insulted her daughter, her family, her heritage, her hopes. I understood perfectly, though. Every word, every implication, every assumption embedded in that casual dismissal of my potential. Mrs. Patterson had looked at my brown skin, heard my mother's accent, and decided that regardless of my grades, my effort, my dreams, there was a ceiling to what I could achieve. Limitations, built into my very identity. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended, the question emerging as much from confusion as from the dawning realization that something precious was being taken from me, that the future I had been building in my mind was being declared impossible by someone in authority. Mrs. Patterson's smile widened, as if my question proved her point. "It means you should focus on practical skills, dear. Secretarial work, maybe, or a trade. College isn't realistic for girls like you. You'd be happier with more appropriate expectations." The word appropriate landed like a slap, carrying with it the weight of centuries of assumptions about who deserved what, who belonged where, who had the right to dream big, and who should be satisfied with less. In that moment, I understood that my ethnicity wasn't just part of my identity. It was being used as evidence of my limitations, proof that certain futures were simply not available to people like me. Mama's face changed as comprehension dawned, her eyes flashing with an anger I had rarely seen, her body straightening as she prepared to defend her daughter against this casual cruelty. But before she could speak, Mrs. Thompson appeared in her classroom doorway, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval, "Elena Martinez is one of my most promising students. She has the potential to succeed at any level she chooses to pursue." Her words were carefully measured, professionally appropriate, but I could hear the anger underneath, the frustration of a teacher who had watched too many talented students have their dreams crushed by low expectations and institutional bias. Mrs. Patterson shrugged, unrepentant. "We'll see," she said, her tone suggesting that she considered Mrs. Thompson naive. That time would prove her own assessment correct. She walked away, her heels clicking on the polished floor, leaving Mama and me sitting in the hallway with the wreckage of assumptions we hadn't known we were making about fairness, about merit, about the relationship between effort and opportunity. The meeting with Mrs. Thompson went well. She praised my progress, discussed advanced classes, talked about college preparatory programs, but her words felt hollow after Mrs. Patterson's pronouncement. How could I believe in my potential when someone in authority had declared it limited? How could I trust encouragement that seemed to contradict what the school counselor considered realistic? That night, I lay in the bed I shared with Carmen, staring at the ceiling, replaying those words. For a Mexican girl. Girls like you. Appropriate expectations. Each phrase felt like a cage being constructed around me, limiting not just what I could achieve, but what I was allowed to dream of achieving. Carmen, sensing my distress, rolled over and whispered, "¿Qué pasa? Elena?" I told her what had happened, my voice breaking as I tried to explain not just the words but the feelings they had created, the way they had made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, my abilities, my future. Carmen listened in silence, her anger building with each detail, her body tensing as she absorbed the casual cruelty of Mrs. Patterson's assessment. "She's wrong," Carmen said fiercely when I finished. "She's wrong and she's stupid and she doesn't know you at all." Her words were meant to comfort, but I could hear the doubt underneath. The recognition that Mrs. Patterson's opinion carried weight in ways that our family's belief in me might not. The next few weeks were difficult as I struggled to reconcile. Competing messages about my potential. Mrs. Thompson continued to encourage me, to push me toward advanced classes, to talk about college as if it were a given rather than a fantasy. But Mrs. Patterson's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger each time I struggled with an assignment. Each time my accent was noticed. Each time someone looked at me and saw limitations rather than possibilities. I began to notice things I had overlooked before. The way some teachers called on me less frequently than white students. The way guidance counselors steered Mexican-American students toward vocational rather than academic tracks. The way assumptions about our abilities became self-fulfilling prophecies as students internalized low expectations and began to achieve accordingly. The tracking system at Roosevelt was particularly insidious, dividing students into academic levels that supposedly reflected ability but actually reflected assumptions about race, class, and language. Students with Spanish surnames were disproportionately placed in lower tracks, regardless of their actual academic performance, while white students with average grades were given the benefit of the doubt and placed in college preparatory classes. I was fortunate that Mrs. Thompson advocated for me, ensuring that I was placed in advanced English and history courses despite Mrs. Patterson's objections. But I was constantly aware of being one of only a handful of Mexican-American faces in these classes, constantly conscious of representing not just myself, but my entire community, constantly worried that any mistake would be seen as confirmation, that students like me didn't belong in academic settings. The pressure was enormous and isolating. In advanced classes, I was often the only Spanish speaker, surrounded by students who had grown up with different assumptions about their futures, different levels of family support for academic achievement, different access to resources that I was still learning existed. Many of my white classmates talked casually about college applications, SAT prep courses, summer programs at universities, opportunities I had never heard of, pathways to success that no one in my family knew how to navigate. At the same time, some students in my neighborhood began to view me with suspicion, as if my academic success meant I was trying to be white, trying to reject my heritage, trying to escape my community rather than uplift it. The criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. I was trying to escape the limitations that poverty and discrimination had placed on my family, but I wanted to take everyone with me, to prove that success was possible for all of us. By my sophomore year in high school, I was working part-time at a department store in Beverly Hills, taking 2 buses each way to reach a job that paid slightly better than anything available in East LA. The work was in the stockroom, unpacking, shipments, organizing inventory, occasionally helping on the sales floor when they needed extra hands during busy periods. The commute was exhausting. Over an hour each way on crowded buses filled with other working people traveling between the neighborhoods where they lived and the areas where they could find employment. I would leave school, change clothes quickly, and catch the first bus, often not arriving home until after 9 o'clock, tired and smelling of the cardboard and plastic that filled the stockroom. The job itself was physically demanding, but not complicated. Unloading boxes, checking inventory against packing slips, organizing merchandise by size and style. The stockroom was hot and poorly ventilated, filled with the constant noise of delivery trucks and the chatter of workers who spoke a mixture of Spanish and English, creating a linguistic environment that felt more familiar than the academic setting I navigated during school hours. Most of my coworkers were other young people from East LA, Boyle Heights, and similar neighborhoods, all of us working to help support our families while trying to stay in school. We developed friendships built on shared experience, shared struggles, shared dreams of something better. Many of them were smart enough for college, but lacked the guidance, resources, or encouragement necessary to make that transition. The sales floor was different territory entirely, carpeted, air-conditioned, filled with merchandise that cost more than my family spent on clothes in an entire year. The few times I was asked to help with customer service, I was acutely aware of being watched, evaluated, judged by customers who seemed to question whether I belonged in their shopping environment. Mrs. Davidson was the floor supervisor, a perfectly coiffed woman in her 50s who wore expensive suits and maintained the kind of groomed appearance that required significant time and money. She was polite but cool, treating the stockroom workers as necessary but inferior, people who served a function but weren't really part of the store's image or culture. The incident that changed everything happened during the Christmas rush of my junior year. The store was crowded with holiday shoppers, the sales floor buzzing with activity, everyone working extra hours to handle the increased volume. I had been asked to help with gift wrapping, a service the store provided for premium customers, work that required more skill and customer interaction than my usual stockroom duties. I was good at gift wrapping. Mama had taught me to be precise with my hands, to take pride in making things beautiful even when resources were limited. The customers seemed pleased with my work, and I was proud to be contributing to the store's busiest season in a more visible way. Mrs. Davidson had been watching me work, and I thought she might be considering promoting me to a sales position, a possibility that excited me because it would mean better pay and more regular hours. After the rush died down, she called me into her office, a small space behind the sales floor decorated with fashion magazines and promotional materials from cosmetics companies. "Elena," she said, settling behind her desk and folding her hands, in a gesture that I would later recognize as preparation for delivering bad news. "You're a good worker, very conscientious, very reliable." I smiled, thinking this was the beginning of a conversation about advancement, about recognition of my efforts and potential. The praise felt earned. I had never been late, never missed a shift, always completed my assignments efficiently and thoroughly. "However," she continued, her tone shifting subtly, "I think you should understand that certain positions require a particular presentation. Our sales associates interact directly with our clientele, and we need to maintain a certain image." The word "however" changed everything, transforming praise into prelude to dismissal, making clear that my reliability and conscientiousness were insufficient to overcome whatever deficiency she was about to identify. I felt my stomach tighten, with the familiar sensation of being judged by standards I hadn't known existed. "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to suspect that I understood perfectly, that this conversation was heading toward territory I had encountered before, in different forms, in different settings. Mrs. Davidson's smile was thin, apologetic in a way that suggested she was sorry for the necessity of what she was about to say, rather than sorry for saying it. "Elena, you're lovely, but you don't quite fit the image we're trying to project. Our customers expect a certain look. More all-American, if you know what I mean." The phrase all-American hit me like a physical blow, its meaning crystal, clear despite its coded language. In her world, all-American meant white, meant blonde, meant features that didn't suggest foreign origins or divided loyalties. It meant I could be a good worker, a reliable employee, but I could never be the face of the store, never represent the brand to customers who might be disturbed by evidence of America's actual diversity. "But I was born here," I said, the words emerging automatically, as if documentation of my citizenship could counter her assessment of my appearance. "I speak English perfectly. I'm getting good grades in school." Mrs. Davidson nodded patronizingly, as if my response proved that I was missing the point rather than addressing it directly. "Of course, dear. This isn't about your qualifications or your background. It's about what our customers are comfortable with, what they expect when they shop here." The explanation made it worse rather than better, suggesting that my exclusion wasn't personal, but business, not individual prejudice, but market research, not discrimination, but customer service. She was hiding behind the preferences of shoppers who, she implied, would be uncomfortable being served by someone who looked like me, who might take their business elsewhere if forced to interact with employees who reminded them that America was changing. I left work that day feeling hollowed out, as if something essential had been removed from my chest, leaving an empty space that ached with each breath. The bus ride home was a blur of city lights and traffic, my reflection in the window showing a face that I was now hyper-aware was somehow wrong, somehow inappropriate for certain spaces and opportunities. Mama was in the kitchen when I arrived home, preparing dinner while helping Luce with homework, the familiar sounds and smells of our household, providing comfort that felt inadequate against the day's wound. She took one look at my face and knew something had happened, her maternal instincts immediately alert to her daughter's distress. "¿Qué pasó, mija?" she asked, setting down her wooden spoon and giving me her full attention, ready to listen, to comfort, to fight whatever had hurt her child. I told her about the conversation, about Mrs. Davidson's explanation, about the casual way my appearance had been declared unsuitable for customer-facing positions. The words came out haltingly, interrupted by tears I had been holding back since leaving the store, by anger that felt too large for my teenage body to contain. Mama listened without interruption, her face growing more serious with each detail, her hands clenching and unclenching as she absorbed the casual cruelty of the rejection. When I finished, she pulled me into her arms, her embrace fierce and protective, her voice soft but firm when she finally spoke. "Mija," she said, "they are wrong. You are beautiful. You are smart. You are worthy of any opportunity you want to pursue. Don't let their small minds make you small." Her words were meant to heal, but they couldn't erase the larger truth that Mrs. Davidson had revealed, that no matter how hard I worked, how well I performed, how much I achieved, there would always be spaces where my appearance alone would disqualify me from opportunities. The American dream required not just effort and talent, but also the right look, the right background, the right ability to make others comfortable with your presence. That night, I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, cataloging features that I had never seen as problematic before. My brown skin, my dark hair, my indigenous cheekbones inherited from ancestors I had never met but carried in my DNA. For the first time, I saw my face through Mrs. Davidson's eyes, understanding how my appearance could be read as foreign, as other, as incompatible with certain versions of American identity. The experience changed my relationship with mirrors, with photographs, with any reflection that reminded me of how others might see me. I began to notice how Mexican Americans were represented in media, in advertising, in the stories told about American success. We appeared as workers, as problems to be solved, as colorful additions to the national narrative, but rarely as protagonists, as leaders, as people whose stories mattered for their own sake. High school became a balancing act between academic achievement and cultural identity, between the expectations placed on me by teachers who saw potential and the limitations imposed by counselors who saw ethnicity. I learned to navigate different worlds with different languages, different assumptions, different rules about who belonged and who didn't. Mrs. Rodriguez, my senior year English teacher, became a crucial mentor during this period. She was a Chicana, who had gone to college in the 1950s, who understood intimately the challenges facing Mexican-American students, who had fought her own battles against low expectations and limited opportunities. Her classroom was a sanctuary where Spanish surnames were never mispronounced, where Mexican-American literature was taught alongside traditional American texts, where students were encouraged to see their heritage as an asset rather than an obstacle. She pushed me to apply to universities, to seek scholarships, to believe that college was not just possible, but expected. Under her guidance, I began to understand that academic success wasn't about abandoning my culture, but about using education to serve my community, to open doors not just for myself, but for others who would follow. The college application process was intimidating and complex, filled with requirements and procedures that no one in my family understood. Mrs. Rodriguez stayed after school to help me navigate financial aid forms, to practice for interviews, to write essays that captured my story without reducing it to a collection of stereotypes about overcoming adversity. When the acceptance letters arrived, accompanied by scholarship offers that would make college financially possible, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. The opportunities were real, but so were the challenges that awaited someone like me in environments where I would often be the only Mexican-American face in classrooms, dormitories, and social spaces. The summer before college was filled with preparation and anxiety as I tried to imagine what it would be like to live in a world where my background was exotic rather than normal, where my family's traditions would need explanation, where I would need to constantly translate not just language but experience for people who had never known anyone like me. Mama helped me pack, folding clothes with the same care she brought to her sewing, each item selected to help me navigate a world she had never seen but was sending her daughter to conquer. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and I understood that she was excited and proud, but also frightened, worried about sending her child into an environment where the values and support that had sustained our family might not be available or understood. "Remember who you are, mija," she said as we finished packing. "Remember where you come from. Don't let them make you ashamed of your family, your language, your heritage. Use what they teach you, but don't forget what we taught you." Her words became a mantra that sustained me through the challenges that followed. The roommate who was surprised that I spoke English without an accent. The professors who mispronounced my name despite multiple corrections. The classmates who asked if I was there on affirmative action as if merit-based scholarships were impossible for someone with my background. College was simultaneously liberating and isolating, a place where I could explore ideas and possibilities that had been unimaginable in high school, while also navigating social and cultural territories where I often felt like an outsider, a visitor in spaces designed for others. The academic work was challenging but manageable. The social challenges were more complex and exhausting. I majored in education, driven by Mrs. Rodriguez's example, and by a desire to return to my community with tools that could help other students navigate the obstacles I was learning to overcome. The education program was filled with idealistic young people who wanted to make a difference, but many of them had limited understanding of the systemic challenges facing schools and communities. Like mine, field placements took me back to schools similar to Roosevelt, where I could see with new eyes the resource disparities, the low expectations, the structural barriers that made academic success difficult for students who possessed the same intelligence and potential as their more privileged peers. The experience reinforced my commitment to education as a tool for social change, while also revealing how much work would be needed to create genuine equity. Graduation day was emotional for my entire family, all of them crowding into the auditorium to watch me receive a diploma that represented not just my achievement, but their sacrifice, their faith, their investment in a future that had seemed impossible when we lived in that crowded apartment in East LA. Mama cried as I walked across the stage, her tears a mixture of joy and relief, pride and gratitude for opportunities that had been denied to her generation but were becoming available to mine. The years that followed brought their own challenges and victories as I returned to East LA as a teacher, working to create the kind of classroom I had needed as a student, fighting against low expectations and limited resources while trying to inspire young people to dream bigger than their circumstances suggested was possible. I married Carlos, a teacher I met during my first year at Roosevelt Elementary, a man who shared my commitment to education and community, who understood the balancing act required to maintain cultural identity while pursuing professional success. Our wedding was a celebration that bridged old traditions and new possibilities, families and friends gathering to witness a partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. We raised 3 children, Roberto, named for my father, Anna, and Miguel, in a world that was slowly changing, where opportunities were expanding but obstacles remained. Each of them faced their own version of the challenges I had encountered, their own moments when ethnicity became a reason for exclusion or limitation, their own decisions about how to navigate spaces where they might be the only brown faces. Roberto became an engineer, following the path that Diego had blazed, using his technical skills to build bridges both literal and metaphorical. Anna chose medicine, driven by a desire to serve communities that were underserved by the healthcare system, where language barriers and cultural misunderstandings often prevented people from getting the care they needed. Miguel became a lawyer, specializing in civil rights, fighting in courtrooms the battles that previous generations had fought in fields and factories. Watching them succeed while maintaining connections to their heritage filled me with the kind of pride that my parents must have felt watching me graduate from college. Each achievement was personal but also communal, representing progress not just for our family, but for everyone who had faced similar obstacles, similar moments of doubt, similar decisions about whether to fight or accept limitations placed on them by others. Now, at 68, I look back on a life that spanned enormous changes in American society, from the overt discrimination of my childhood to the more subtle but persistent barriers that still exist today. Progress has been made, opportunities have expanded, but the fundamental challenge remains the same: how to maintain dignity and identity while pursuing